always walking a kilometer and a half on the beach every day.
Right, fantastic. So I see Congressman Rose has joined us. Welcome and good evening. We're very, very happy to see you. And so excited when you reached out last week and you told me some great news in your family. Congratulations on the new boy in your family. And looking forward to hearing more about that. And we've been following the news and all your great work and volunteering for the National Guard and being hands-on. So it's really fantastic. So thank you for coming. Tonight, Eddie Esses is going to be moderating our town hall. And I'd like to reintroduce Mark Gerson, who is a longtime and close friend with Congressman Rose. So Mark, if you just give a couple of minute intro, and then we'll get right into the town hall. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I met Max in about a year before his election, and I was introduced by a couple friends who said, "You got to meet this guy." And I said, "Look, I don't support Democrats." And they said, "No, this guy's special. Like you're going to like him." I said, "I don't support Democrats." And then they said, "Just meet him." So we went to lunch, and I really enjoyed his company. And I mentioned in the course of the lunch, United Hatzalah, and how we're able to get to victims in the moment to separate life from death. And Max said, "I want to bring that to the U.S." And I'd heard that so many times from politicians that I just dismissed it as kind of, nice words from someone running for office. And because experience told me that nothing would ever come of it. I mean, experience of talking to probably dozens of people over the years about how we could make this Israel's gift to the world, how we could bring this life-saving system of volunteer first response to the U.S. And then Max wins against all odds. The president won the district by 12 points, and Max wins as a Democrat. And then I get a call about a week later, and it's from Max, and I figured it was a typical, call from a politician. But Max says, "That system you told me about in Israel, like, how can we bring it to Staten Island?" And I'd never really seen that kind of follow-up from anybody before, despite having talked about it with dozens of people. And Max has been absolutely determined to bring this system of volunteer life-saving to New York City, and specifically to Staten Island, and we've been working very hard on it. And it's just remarkable that here is a congressman who genuinely cares about his district, is willing to show political courage to bring a solution from, in this case, Israel to his constituents, really at whatever the cost, just because he knows it saves lives. And that's just the kind of person that Max is. And we've become great friends ever since. And I've been now a very enthusiastic supporter, because I'm so impressed by his integrity, by his courage, and by his commitment to seek out innovative solutions, regardless of their provenance, whether they're conservative or liberal, whatever. He just finds the best solutions from all around the world and wants to bring them home to his district of Brooklyn and Staten Island. And so I'm just grateful to be his friend, and God willing, he will win this election and will win many more, and we will bring the United Hatzalah system to the US, and particularly to Staten Island and Brooklyn. So Max.
Great, thank you.
Mark.
Eddie, take it away.
Mark, first of all, Mark, that's extraordinarily kind, and it's a great honor of mine to call you a dear friend. You and I have had many of intellectual debates and conversations, and I always appreciate the way you're thinking truly outside of the box, in a really in a philosophical way that I don't often encounter.
Well, thank you.
And I look forward to many years to come of not only debates, but of truly helping people.
Baruch Hashem.
So it is also wonderful to see across this Zoom so many friends whose faces I haven't seen for some months now. Rabbi Hidary, of course, and Joey and Sam and Jackie and Frida, and so many others. Eddie down there, I see you. My family did just get a little bigger. My wife and I 2 months ago adopted a child, Miles Benjamin Rose. You can call him BB if you like, Joey. And it in a way that, becoming a parent, it puts things into perspective. someone recently told me that God willing, my son Miles will live into the next century. And we think now, as we engage in the greatest fight of our respective lifetimes, that we are not just fighting for tomorrow. We're not just fighting for today, but we are fighting to preserve this country as the greatest country in the world. This is our way of life, our freedom, our prosperity, our equity, our justice, not just for ourselves, but for our children and their children's children. And it is a moment that I believe requires innovation. It's a moment that I believe requires a dedication of resources that is almost unparalleled and unprecedented, at least in our lifetimes. And it is a moment for solidarity. It's a moment for us to put aside the blind partisanship that has overtaken this country. Partisanship is one thing. That's a debate. That's a clash of ideas. Blind partisanship is tribal, and it holds the country back. This is a moment to put that away, put that aside, figure out how we can continue to come together. You know, I got activated for the National Guard, first member of Congress to do so in the country. And we were able to stand up a COVID-only facility that will continue to serve this congressional district in New York City in the event of a second surge of COVID patients. And we can't lose sight of preparing for that second surge is critical for opening the economy. And I linked up with my old Army unit, the Fighting 69th Infantry, America's oldest infantry unit. And in 6 days, we stood this facility up. And on the 6th day, we were accepting our first patient. And in that final huddle before the patient was accepted, I watched as the uniformed soldiers applauded the frontline medical professionals, the soldiers of this war that we are fighting right now. They're still out there sacrificing. They're still out there, many of whom haven't been able to hug their children in months. But we have to make sure that we are continuing to keep them in our hearts, continuing to fight for them, but continuing to remember that that moment of soldiers applauding nurses and doctors and supporting them tells you everything you need to know about this country, and it tells you everything you need to know about why we're going to get through this. Us getting through this is not inevitable, but it is eminently possible. And again, as I look out across this group, inspired to see you all strong and healthy, I know that's exactly where we are destined to go. So I look forward to hearing your questions. I look forward to engaging in a robust conversation. And I just thank you all again so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you so much for being back here with us. I wish we were able to be in person, back with you again in Sephardic Synagogue, where you were with us just a couple.
That's some long hair you got going on, Eddie. Yeah, is that a pony? You look like an Italian soccer player. Unbelievable.
I haven't been able to get a haircut in like 3 months. It's crazy.
Unbelievable. I bought clippers. I've been shaving my own.
I love it. Well, I'm looking forward to getting back to the hair cutter soon, because God knows I need it.
Don't be so hard on yourself.
Well, also, I wanted to really congratulate you, as we've mentioned, congrats on becoming a father. It's amazing. I saw your Instagram posts, and it's beautiful. And you're right that he looks like you, but even more so, you're right that he is already cooler than you.
Oh my God. My wife, for many of you know, this is a fashion stylist, and my son, I'm like, oh my God, the gear that she's putting him in. It's a cool kid. But I'm on night duty usually, up 3 or 4 times a night. So be easy on me, Eddie, with your questions. Okay. Let's not make this a recap of Meet the Press. All right, buddy?
I'll do my best. All right. So as we all know, this pandemic has really changed everything. It's ravaged the entire country. It's the biggest pandemic that we've seen in over 100 years. You recently, as you mentioned, you were deployed to the National Guard to serve and help build a 262-bed hospital at the South Beach Psychiatric Center in Staten Island. Could you talk a little bit more about what that process was like, what the experience was like from the beginning, and also how your military experience might have affected your experience over there?
Absolutely. First of all, let me just say that whatever I did over the course of those several weeks pales in comparison to the service of others in these moments. And I've given you all a few anecdotes of what people are doing and continue to do right now. But theoretically, the lessons learned from this are applicable across the country. We made the mistake early on of talking too much about beds. I don't know if you remember, we were saying, I've got this number of beds. A bed alone is relatively irrelevant as we seek to address this new war, because we can't apply a medical model that we used for hurricane relief, where the cases that you're being confronted with involve people needing to get stitched up or something that is relatively simple in nature. COVID cases are very complex, resource-intensive respiratory crises, often involving individuals that have underlying conditions of a whole range. And that requires a hospital. So it's absolutely critical that we use the term treatment units. As we stood up these 240 or so beds, it wasn't the bed, it was the bed and the oxygen concentrator and the medical professional and the supply chain and the medical resources that were in inventory. And it was the ER professional on hand, and it was the ambulance outside ready to transport someone to a ventilator as quickly as possible. All of these things interlinked. And as such, we have to be using these moments when there's a clear low, right? We've bent the curve is flattening, the curve is declining. Talk about the curve however you like. We're missing the part of the conversation is, what do we do why this is happening? And one of the things that we have to do is continue to invest in our healthcare infrastructure by expanding and increasing the number of treatment units available, so as we are more prepared for that second surge, so that when that second surge comes, we're no longer thinking that we're about to cap out on the number of ventilators. We're no longer thinking that we're about to cap out on the number of beds possible. Now, this is something that I don't want to see us get back to that. No one would hope for that. But I also don't want us to be flat-footed again. This is so critical for also reinstilling confidence that we as a society are ready to be opened up again. Consumer confidence is so critical as we look to get back to business. And then let me just also say this as well. On the testing front and on the PPE front, this is not nearly as complicated. I see Jackie, I see you as well. Look at that. This testing and PPE stuff is not as complicated as we're making it out to be, okay? When you think about testing, it's a swab, okay? That's a glorified Q-tip. It's lab equipment. It's lab reagents. Ultimately, what this is critical supplies. And so it begs the question, why do we not have enough of these simple and nonetheless critical supplies in this country? And I'm not in the blame game, okay? I'm not. But why is the private sector not supporting this? And I think one of the reasons why is because the private sector is at this point unwilling to make the fixed cost investments necessary to ramp up production over the long term because they're not confident that the demand will persist. And so I continue to advocate that the federal government engages in long-term contracts with swab manufacturers, with PPE manufacturers, so as to further guarantee demand over the long term and make sure that they continue to ramp up production. The president can utilize the Defense Production Act. I've been advocating for that for months. He has done that. And the president has also transitioned purchasing authority to the Pentagon and the Defense Logistics Agency, another thing that I think is critical as we bring more, procurement acumen to this fight. So I apologize if I kind of got in the weeds there a little bit, but I'm just sick and tired of you can't just talk about it from a simplistic manner. That's how we're going to get into trouble again.
So Congress has now passed 2 stimulus bills, including 2 rounds of SBA loans that are aimed at helping small businesses retain their employees. After the first round, there was really a lot of concern that a lot of the money was going to huge corporations, public companies. Some examples would be Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, also Shake Shack. So now that a lot of the money from the second round has started to go out, are you confident that it's going to small businesses like the ones in our community? And also, what are the requirements to receive and forgive and have the loans forgiven for people who are curious, how to handle it themselves?
Yeah. So, you know, can you all still hear me?
Yeah.
You all can still see me? Okay. So sorry, I'm just adjusting this. All right. The crisis that we face is really twofold. The first is that there was an absolute need for urgency. Okay, if we had entered into some type of legislative analysis paralysis as the economy was rapidly declining before our eyes and waited until we had the perfect policy prescription, we would have gotten funds out maybe June, maybe July, and the economy would no longer exist as we remembered it. There wouldn't have been businesses there to accept it. So certainly a scheme was devised, a system was devised to use the SBA and financial intermediaries to allocate capital as quickly as possible to businesses. And that program was by no means perfect. So we made an effort in the second iteration to improve upon it. It was clear that that financial intermediaries were prioritizing the larger businesses that had larger loan requests, that had pre-established lending relationships, i.e. they did what was easiest for them. So in the second iteration, we pushed $60 billion to community banks. That was absolutely essential. The second thing that I did is I led an effort to advocate to the top 5 banks, that they not only prioritize those entities that they have pre-established relationships with. We also pushed the SBA and the Treasury Secretary to increase the auditing of the larger loans to make sure that businesses weren't getting loans that they needed, quite frankly. They've increased the due diligence centered around large public companies, large entities that have access to capital markets. Shake Shack is a great example. We all heard about Harvard. We heard about the Lakers. To make sure that there is discretion there. Before I go on, though, let me just say this, okay? This is not the 08-09 financial crisis. And we can't just fight the last war ideologically, okay? If I'm working for a company, I just care about my job. I don't care about whether my company is a small business or a medium business, a successful business, blah, blah, blah. We have to make sure that that job is taken. I'm not ready to pit small businesses against medium businesses against large businesses. It's not right. But there are certainly still improvements to be made. One is that we have to realize that there are particular circumstances in New York. This 75-25 split that the SBA is pushing doesn't make sense. Not for New York, where people's leases, their mortgages, this and that, it often exceeds 25% of their costs. So in this bill tomorrow, that is one thing that we are pushing to do away with that paradigm of 75-25. The other thing that doesn't make sense is this 8-week limit by which you can use the funds. I believe it should be extended out for the duration of the year, and that's also something that we've successfully included in this legislation to give businesses the freedom to bring their employees back, to stretch out the funds so that they can be utilized responsibly and when they're most needed. And we also have to refurbish and reopen these idle grants so that people can get the additional funds, whether it's the grant or the low interest loan, which is another critical resource for our small businesses. You know, I come from a family of small businesses. My great-grandfather Herman escaped anti-Semitism in Odessa, in Russia, in the Soviet Union, came to Brooklyn, opened up a diner in Williamsburg, Kellogg's Diner. It's still there. He sold it too early, Eddie. So, I guess all of our family histories are stories of failed real estate opportunities and business opportunities in New York City. But nonetheless, though, I saw my grandfather and my father open a business together, a blood testing laboratory in the Brooklyn Army Terminal. I get it. When you own a business, that's not a 9-to-5. That's your life. Your employees are family. You pay yourself last. You go to their bar mitzvahs, you go to their weddings. You don't want to lay them off. You don't want to, the last thing you want to see is to watch that business wither on the vine. And that is the pain and suffering that our small business owners are going through. And we have to be there for them. The SBA loan is now prioritizing the smaller businesses. We're going to push it to continue to further prioritize the mom and pops, 10 employees or less, so we can make sure that money is getting to where it is most urgently needed. And I will not be satisfied until every single business in this district that needs support gets it. And if you know of any businesses that need help, please contact me directly, contact my office. We will advocate for them each step of the way.
Thank you for all your hard work on making sure that community businesses are getting the PPP that they need, and for advocating to make sure that people who have a harder time getting those loans, are able to get them now.
Yeah, and look, that average loan is now down to $79,000, so that's definitely progress.
Absolutely. So now the discussion on Capitol Hill has kind of shifted over a little bit. It's shifted from PPP and unemployment insurance over to funding for states and local governments. New York, for example, just one example, is now facing most likely a $13 to $15 billion budget shortfall. Certain people in government have gone out and said, that there shouldn't be a so-called blue state bailout. Now, you've come out very strongly against that argument. Could you talk a little bit about why that funding is so important for states like New York and local governments, and also why it isn't a blue state bailout? And then if we don't receive that federal help, are we going to have to be paying that money to balance out the budget ourselves as taxpayers?
Yeah, so look, it has been the height of ignorance, naivete, coldness, and economic stupidity for people like Mitch McConnell and Rick Scott to call this a blue state bailout. All right, New York City, New York State has been the global epicenter of this crisis. The global epicenter, not just the epicenter of America, the global epicenter for number of cases per capita deaths. Just my congressional district alone, tragically, we've lost over 1,000 people. Can't even wrap your mind around that. And I'm sorry that I react emotionally to this, but when another state, call it whatever you like, Southern, red, I don't care, an American state, when they have a hurricane, when they have a natural disaster, we don't turn around and evaluate their political affiliation. No, we say those are Americans in need, and we have to be there for them. And we ask only for that in return. Now, it's fascinating as well that they are utilizing the argument that our economic trials and tribulations right now are the consequence of our economic mismanagement prior, particularly mismanagement of our pension funds. That, especially the latter, fundamentally false. Was our city managed perfectly? Believe you me, by no sense of the word. You all know how I feel about our mayor. Was our state managed perfectly? No, of course not. But our pensions had nothing to do with this. To say nothing of the fact that, and I had an editorial in the Daily News saying this, there's $3 billion worth of New York pension money flowing to Florida residents every year. Where do you think they all retire to? It's crazy. It's insane. But this is also economically stupid, this proposal, because if you want to send the markets into a tailspin, if you want to significantly depress consumer confidence, if you want to stall our economic growth, you'll allow for New York State and New York City to enter into some type of bankruptcy with the question whether a state could do that in the first place. So what has to happen? Well, so as to avoid tax increases, as well as the mass firing of public servants, whom we now call essential workers. They were always essential by all of our books, I know that. We have got to have a massive infusion to the state government and the local government of capital from the federal government, the only entity that can print money. And that is something that I am fighting for each and every day. And that allotment of money cannot just be based on population. It also has to be based on a formula that includes the severity of the COVID crisis that you have experienced, of which New York has an unparalleled and severe experience. And I'm confident with this bill, we are getting there. And we have got to get this money to New York State and New York City. I don't want to see your taxes go up during this time of crisis. I don't want to see your business expenses go up during this time of crisis. And I certainly do not want to see our firefighters and cops and teachers and nurses and first responders and sanitation workers laid off during this time of crisis and watch our public services decline as a consequence as well.
Absolutely. I want to ask two more questions before we turn it over to questions from the crowd. So early on in the crisis, the main focus in terms of the medical resources that we need were on things like masks, gowns, ventilators. Now, as we start to look toward hopefully reopening the economy as soon as possible, it's a couple of different things that we need. We need testing and contact tracing. Those are the two things that allow us to reopen the economy. So are you confident that these two things could be brought up to scale in New York in a way that would allow us to start to open things back up and for all of us to start leaving our houses again soon?
I'm confident that we're going to keep on working for it. You know, I have not been impressed to date by the degree to which the mayor is acting with a sense of urgency around scaling up testing. The governor certainly has done a better job at that. Our congressional district had the first drive-through testing of any entity in New York City. We should be proud of that. But we have to have a massive diffusion of technology around this to allow for on-site testing as well as rapid testing throughout our city. It's the only pathway absent a vaccine. This is a resourcing, logistical, and entrepreneurially innovative challenge that it will only take the full resources of the federal government to address. There's a reason why I associate this with total war, because I think that it requires that type of resource allocation and that type of societal solidarity. And we are getting there, but we are not there yet. I mentioned earlier some of the logistical and supply hurdles that I think we have to overcome. Each and every day we're improving on that, but there's still more work to be done. I will not be satisfied until every single person, asymptomatic, symptomatic, can get a test at their discretion and virtually instantaneously, virtually. So we're going to keep on working towards that. This is, in some ways, the testing infrastructure, testing/contact tracing, and the vaccines represent the Manhattan projects of our day.
So lastly, before we turn it over to the crowd, one of the countries that's at the forefront of the battle against COVID-19 obviously is Israel, where they've had some major medical breakthroughs on things like treatments. I think it's times like these that kind of show how important our relationship is with Israel, and it just reiterates the importance of working together. Could you just talk a little bit about how you've worked to strengthen that relationship and what we need to do going forward?
Yeah, no, you know, as many of you know, I hope all of you, the United States relationship with Israel is of paramount importance to me. And making sure that that strong relationship remains bipartisan so that it does not matter who controls Congress, it does not matter who controls the White House, that we have confidence in America's support for Israel. That is the story of the 21st century, as it was the story of the 20th century, or much of the 20th century. I consider one of, and if not my number one priority in Congress, and my number one priority as the youngest Jewish member of Congress in the United States of America. Israel has done remarkable things when it comes to testing availability, when it comes to contact tracing, utilizing people's phones, utilizing actually their counter-terror infrastructure as well, to dedicate that to tracking down positive COVID cases, as well as to using innovation to, you know, I just read that they're considering ways in which they can utilize tap water as disinfectants. You know, as they potentially lead the way when it comes to delivering innovations to fight COVID. You know, I dare someone to even mention BDS Israel comes out, why don't you try BDS first? Israel comes up with the top innovation for COVID in the world. It just, again, reveals not just the intense immorality of that effort, but also just the abject economic and geopolitical stupidity of it. Abject. So I stand in awe of what Israel has been able to accomplish. I've also think it's of note that there's an emerging alliance of certain Sunni states with Israel to fight COVID, further demonstrating the incredible potential for regional peace and stability in years to come as Israel aligns with countries, particularly against the Iranian threat.
Thank you, Congressman. I saw a few questions. If you could give me just 1 minute, something happened to my Zoom and it's harder to find them now. Sorry, 1 second. I saw a question from, I believe it was David Tobias. David, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. If you could go ahead and ask the Congressman your question.
Right. So I work for Sephardic Holim. It's a social service agency. We have a lot of clients who are struggling, like a lot of other people, and they're having really hard time getting their unemployment insurance. They did what they were supposed to do. They filed online. They tried to follow up with calls, but it's just not coming. Is there any way or any number or person in the government that you can give us that they can reach out to?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, they need to reach out directly to my office.
Okay.
We have helped over 1,500 people in their efforts to seek assistance of some type in this fight. It is no secret that the state's unemployment infrastructure has been completely overloaded, and it requires persistence and grit, unfortunately, to get it right now in some cases. And we are treating every single unemployment case as if they are family. And we're showing success in the process. So please have them reach out to my office. If for some reason my office does not respond as they should, my personal cell phone, many of you have it, is 917-502-0128. Again, that's 917-502-0128. I'll personally handle their unemployment issue, and then I'll fire the staffer that ignored them.
Okay, thanks. That sounds very helpful.
Yeah.
I saw a question from Gabby Kesri, if you're here.
Yes, I am.
Great.
Congressman.
How are you?
Good, thank you. So, just to have planning in place as possibly the social fabric around the COVID virus, becomes more acute, of breaking down in terms of inequality being shown, economic hardships and the like. Is there a plan in place to protect our areas from any kind of social, violence or anything of that type that can...
Yeah, no, look, this is an unfortunate reality. First of all, that we have seen a continued effort on the internet as well as in the real on-the-ground world to blame this crisis on Jews. It's disgusting, it's anti-Semitic, it's hate speech, and we should utilize the full apparatus of the law to crack down on them. And you consider me, as I have continued to be, when violence erupts against Jews, the loudest advocate that nobody be treated with any sensitivities as we crack down on that. I've also continued to be very forceful with my efforts to get this type of content offline, urging and pushing social media companies to do their job and make sure that falsities and hate speech like this, that there's no home for them on their platforms. We went through this several months ago. It seems like a distant memory, but it's not. as Jews were saying throughout New York City, afraid to go to shul, afraid to congregate amongst their loved ones, afraid to wear their kippah outside their home. We can't afford to allow once again for that to return. So it's critical that law enforcement spends time protecting communities that are threatened, like Jewish communities throughout the city, rather than allocating law enforcement to enforce social distancing and then particularly single out the Jewish community. And I think you all know what I'm referring to.
Yes, but in general, our areas, will they be patrolled, not in terms of just anti-Semitism, but just in terms of, people who are having hardships and, there might be some kind of anger and frustration.
Well, no, of course, they should be, and I'll continue to advocate that they are.
There must be
I have a working relationship with all the precinct commanders that cover your area, 60, 61, 62, and I'll continue to advocate for that. That's the least that you deserve, not the most.
Thank you.
So a question from Isaac B. If you're here.
Hi.
Hey, Isaac.
How you doing, Congressman Maxwell?
Hey, Isaac, what's going on? I didn't see you before. How you doing?
I'm one of your Sephardic guys. Okay.
I know who you are, buddy. You were sleeping earlier. You were lying
Yeah,
down.
I'm relaxing. relaxing.
Good.
I've been going around the last couple of weeks working. I sell to individual stores. Okay, so I've been going to around Queens area, Brooklyn, Bronx, the outer boroughs, and it's we're talking about small businesses, and all that, and we want to get the help from the federal government. All right. Why is it that a Target, a Walmart, now they have essentials, we know, food and stuff like that. Other similar small stores, I'm finding out, are not allowed to open, and at some point, where we go.
Isaac, I completely agree that it is becoming increasingly difficult, to defend what is actually emerging as an artificial distinction between why can I go into a liquor store and not a shoe store? Why can I go to a large Target but not a small market? Blah, blah, blah. I am sensitive to the balance that the governor has had to undertake. But it is clear that we've got to start having some equity in terms of allowing businesses to open up, so long as those businesses safely enforce social distancing amongst their customers.
Absolutely.
And let me just say this as well. There's been a really unfortunate partisan divide that has opened up here, with each side getting caricatured and the country getting unnecessarily ripped apart yet again. You got folks on the left looking at people talking about opening up the economy and talking about them as if they're ignorant deplorables, cold, ignorant deplorables. You got folks on the right looking at people on the left saying shut down, looking at them as elitist dilettantes who get to work remotely and don't, have never worked with their hands in their life. All the while, though, the answer is in the middle. Let's do this responsibly. Let's surge our testing. Let's surge our healthcare infrastructure. But let's not say ridiculous things like the mayor of LA recently said, that we're going to stay closed down until we have a cure. Get out of here, man. We got to do this responsibly, but we have to have a sense of urgency.
Thank you, Congressman.
Absolutely.
All right, so we actually have a father-son group of questions. We got Albert Michon and his father, Michael, if you guys are there. I see.
Yeah, you want to go first? I guess I'll go first. I had two questions. The first one is related to coronavirus, so I'll ask it, and then if you want to take the other one, it's up to you. The first question is, I think that vote by mail is going to be extremely important in the upcoming election. We can only have an effective coronavirus response if our democracy is working, and we don't want to have people choosing between exercising their right to vote and their health. So my question to you is, what can you do as a congressman to make sure that states get the necessary federal aid they need to make that a reality?
Yeah, look, I absolutely support this, federal funding to make sure that this is available to every state that's willing to do it. And beyond that, using every tool at our disposal to make sure that this is something that is available to all. Nobody should ever have to choose between their own health and well-being and exercising their right to vote that our soldiers have died protecting both, abroad, and many others have marched working to expand here at home. So to me, this sounds very simple. It is not, I repeat, this is not about relitigating 2016. I'm sick and tired of people in my own party politicizing this. This isn't, stop saying, oh, we have to do this so that they can't steal the election. Stop. This is merely and only about making sure that every single American citizen has the opportunity amidst a pandemic to vote. That's what I support.
Thank you, Congressman.
Call me Max, man. Come on.
Thank you, Max. Can I ask you my other question? It's off topic.
No, you only get one question. I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Sure. That's for your question.
So, as you know, the state of Israel is near and dear to our hearts, and to me, its status as a Jewish and democratic state is of paramount importance. So, when you spoke to us at Sephardic, I asked you what your position would be if Israel would annex parts of the West Bank, and you told me you'd see what happens. So, since we last spoke, annexation of parts of the West Bank is now achieving official sanction in the Likud and Townhall coalition agreement. And Joe Biden, who is the presidential nominee of your party, said on May 6th that a priority now for the cause of Israeli-Palestinian peace should be resuming our dialogue with Palestinians and pressing Israel not to take actions that make a two-state solution impossible. So my question to you is, do you agree with Joe Biden? And if you do agree with him, what would you do if Israel did follow through and annex parts of the West Bank?
Well, look, I am of the belief that Israel can only achieve long-term security with peace in the region. Now, it is clear to me that under no circumstances should any type of two-state resolution be arrived at that sacrifices Israel's security. So we've spoken all too often, and in some ways in this country, we've normalized discourse around a two-state solution to the point that we don't even discuss the details. Mm-hmm. So it begs the question, are people okay with certain, how do you answer certain questions associated with a two-state solution? Right. Are you okay with there being no border or no security or border control between Jordan and Palestine? Are you okay with the Palestinians having their own army? Are you okay with free movement, air travel between Tehran and Palestine? Are you okay with Israel sacrificing the high terrain? Now, with those questions being acknowledged, correct? I am a believer that with Jared Kushner announcing the potential for a two-state solution, with the president achieving a consensus in the Jewish community, both abroad and at home, we have to do everything possible to achieve peace. And so it remains to be seen, and in some ways my answer remains the same, how the Israeli government moves forward in those negotiations. I have to look at what Joe Biden said. On its face, though, I'm not ready to judge from afar the decisions that Israel makes so long as peace remains on the table, and so long as it remains on the table that we can arrive at a two-state solution.
Thank you, Congressman.
I have a question here that was asked that I read it myself. It's actually from my cousin, Norma Towell. She asked, how does contact tracing work? And is there anything that we need to be concerned about in regards to contact tracing?
What are the concerns?
Yeah, is there anything that we need to worry about in terms of
maybe? Yeah, no, absolutely. There's certainly privacy concerns that we have to take into account. In so many ways, we're entering into the same discussions and debates that we entered into after 9/11. as you continue to balance welfare, well-being, and security alongside privacy. And those are debates that we have to have robustly. I tend to tilt more towards emphasizing well-being and security. That's particularly in the case that, look, if you want to contact trace, you have to know who the person came in contact with. But as we continue to emphasize technology, it is critical to note that the best and most thorough and comprehensive forms of contact tracing involve humans. And as a consequence, I am a full believer in hiring both citywide, statewide, as nationwide, an army of contact tracers who can carry out this task. But we can't be naive, and I'm not going to lie to you. That human and their ability to actually do their job is rendered relatively irrelevant once that person gets on a subway. So we can't overstate within New York City the extent to which contact tracing alone will have a positive effect. And that just speaks to the ways in which in New York City, we have to have New York City specific solutions.
We only have 2 or 3 questions left. Nuri Shaya, are you here? Nuri, if you're here,
Who's here?
if
there,
not,
I
I'll
see
read it
them.
for you. All right, I'm going to read Nuri's question. So she said that we're personally experiencing a rise in hate crimes. What could the mayor be doing differently other than tweeting about it?
In terms of hate crimes?
Yeah.
Okay, increased law enforcement patrols in communities that are being affected by it. So you can have some type of a preventative role, I think is absolutely critical. Making sure that you're not singling out those communities yourself, I think is absolutely critical. Making sure that you are dispelling of many of the stereotypes and rumors, forcefully addressing them so that socioeconomic inequities and economic injustices are not blamed on Jews as a consequence of long-held stereotypes and prejudices, and being very forceful in your language around that. All of these things are absolutely critical, not just for the mayor, but for all our leaders.
And Leon Kurtz, are you here? Yeah, the question about PPE. Leon, are you there? All right, so I'll read it for him.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Hey, Leon.
Hi,
Leon, how's it
Congressman
going,
Rose.
man?
Very
I love
well,
those
thank you.
headphones. I love those
Doing
headphones, man.
All day. Congressman Rose, I'm a physician in the community. We've actually worked very well with your office from Advantage Care Physicians recently, and we're very proud of that and all the great work that you and your office are doing for the community. Some of the concerns that we're definitely hearing from physicians and providers around the area as we serve our patients in the communities is about ensuring that as things open, that physicians are geared with the correct PPE that we need in order to be able to provide the services that we have to as patients and folks get out there again. Clearly, there's been a lot of concerns with recent updates from the FDA that just came out last week with a whole slew of N95 and KN95 masks that were now being deemed as no longer suitable for use in clinical care. What is being done to ensure that physicians, providers in the community will be able to get the appropriate amount of PPE that they're going to need as we increase contact tracing, increase testing moving forward?
Now, first and foremost, I think that the federal government has got to step in and get a handle on take over PPE procurement and utilize the full extent of the Defense Production Act to make sure that we are ramping up private production of PPE as much as possible. If supply does not meet demand, it doesn't matter how much we can give, how much money we can give you, you're not going to be able to find the PPE. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is that we do have to expand the availability of grants to medical providers from the federal government on down through the states and cities so that this doesn't ultimately become an unfunded mandate. It's not lost on me that our medical providers are going through an economic crisis of their own. People are afraid to go to the doctor. Many businesses, medical offices have been shut down. So, to add an unfunded mandate on top of that, I don't think is right.
We'll do one last question before we turn it over to Joe Shamie to close it out. Ian Edison, are you there? Ian had a question on the economy going forward. Ian, if you're there, come forward. If not, I'll read it for you. Okay, so I'm going to read it. Ian asked, what do you think our economy is going to look like in the year ahead? And do you think it's possible to avoid a long-term depression as small businesses continue to close and our service-based economy becomes increasingly difficult to sustain?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. What do you think our economy is going to be looking like in the year ahead? And do you think it's possible at this point to avoid a more long-term depression as small businesses close and our service economy becomes increasingly difficult to sustain?
So, it can't be lost on us that a good portion of our economy relies on economic consumer-based activity, especially in New York City. 61 million tourists a year, obviously a ton of other areas in which people seek out entertainment, restaurants, so on and so forth. And the future of those sectors is certainly in peril. It's one reason why all of the testing that we're talking about, all of the healthcare investments that we're talking about is so absolutely essential. And I do think, though, it is important as we do look at the potential for longer term underemployment in certain sectors that we consider emphasizing infrastructure projects. As there might be a significant need for the reemployment of individuals in certain sectors. But I'm not willing to give up on anybody just yet. This is the United States of America. It's the greatest country in the history of the world in my book. And we're going to beat this, and we're going to get people back to work.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Joey Shamie, if you're here, Joey had some closing remarks that he wanted to give.
Thank you, Eddie. Eddie, what a great job you did interviewing our congressman.
Thanks, Joe.
Max, thank you very much for agreeing to do this chat with us and for always visiting us.
Absolutely.
Literally being one of the greatest friends of our community. I have been around a lot of politicians over the years, Republican and Democrat, and I could say you are one of our greatest friends, one of the greatest friends of Israel. And I give numerous examples of why we need you, why we love you, and what you've done for us. And I could talk about the center, where you most recently got us a lot of money. You helped us obtain a lot of money that we needed to help us get us through this pandemic, and I thank you for that. But you've done it for other institutions, and you helped us and the businesses. When it comes to Israel, you want to talk about BDS, you want to talk about protecting Israeli soldiers from the International Criminal Court, you want to talk about the Iran arms embargo, long list of achievements that you've done, and you're only a junior congressman at this point. So I want everyone on this chat to understand how great a friend we have in Congress and how much we need him. And we need him to continue for many years to come. So I love you, Max. I thank you for all that you do. And I'm telling everybody on this chat, support Max Rose.
Joey, thank you. That means the world. I consider you family as well. And
thank you.
And a dear friend. And I'm just so touched by your words. So thank you so much.
All the best, Max.
Absolutely. And all the best, again, from my family to yours. Stay strong and stay healthy. God bless you.
Thank you. And on that note, if anybody wants to get involved in the upcoming campaign, the election's in November, please reach out to me. I'll put my number in the chat right now, or you can get it from anybody probably around here. Congressman, thank you so much for everything. It's always really just so great having you. You do such amazing work for our community, for New York, and for the country at large. And I really look forward to having you back in shuls with us and hopping around to all the shuls like you love to do. and really just continuing to work with you coming up. So thank you.
Thank you, brother.
And Mabruk on the baby. Mazel
Thank you.
tov, Mabruk. All the best.
Great
See ya.
job, Eddie. Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, Mark Gerson, for joining, and Joe Shamie. And Congressman, thank you so much for giving of your time, and your entire staff for putting this together. It's really always a pleasure. And wish you a wonderful weekend, and everyone Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.